Om Namah Shivaya. Very grateful, but at the same time, I'm a little embarrassed because there were adjectives like eminent, enlightened, and I want to start off by absolutely disabusing each one of you of any notion of such adjectives being applied to me. I'm not an IKS scholar. I am not a IKS thinker or any kind of eminence is ill-suited not to me. But I am a concerned parent. I am I'm an aspiring teacher, and I am a very conscious citizen. And from all these perspectives, to me, Indian knowledge systems is a national strategy. It is not an academic luxury. It's not a pedantic pursuit. It is something that we need to understand as the very basis for this nation making. And I will talk about why I think so, because I think both Principal Ji and Professor have highlighted the need to communicate the value of Indian knowledge systems to the audience in a manner that gains respect and admiration. And there is an architecture to this, and I'd like to talk to you about the architecture of that communication. I come from game development, so my thinking and my approach is significantly shaped by the power of design, by the power of art, by the importance of aesthetics, by the criticality of sophisticated communication in getting the audience attention. But at the same time, all of that grounded in one thing above all, which is the empathy for the person that you're talking to. It is you cannot succeed in product business, particularly in creative business, without putting the end user right at the front and center of everything that you do. And I think IKS, not just philosophically, but also in terms of how we frame, how we articulate, how we think, and how we collectively cognize about Indian knowledge systems, needs to put that student at the center. We are not the hero. The hero is the student who has to make the decision of investing her life's time into this stream. And we have a responsibility to communicate both intellectually and morally that it is going to be time well spent. And I'm saying this from experience, not just my personal experience, but a lot of people that I work with, a lot of people that I interact with. I am in the public sphere. A lot of us have gone out to the world thinking that we've equipped ourselves with knowledge. We've had some reasonable success by standard definitions of success in a professional life. But very late in life, we recognize that we're missing something fundamental. Personally, to me, this started happening around 2012. I was always a socially conscious individual, but I was a product of my times. I graduated in 2001. I am not, by any stretch of imagination, a talented person, but I was a beneficiary of a rising tide that lifted all boats. 1991, the liberalization happened. By 2001, industries were being set up in India. So even an average student like I could go out into the market and get a decent entry into the industry. I'm not saying it was easy. All of the anxieties that a young person has today, I also had. But then the opportunity was slightly larger. And then, of course, for the next 10 years, like all other professionals, you get busy trying to make a mark. And it's important. It's important that we get people, not just from corporate, we get people from social dimension. Of course, Amrita itself is probably the biggest socio-academic enterprise that there is. We get people from creative units. We get people from different professions. Because this problem is too complex and too tangled for any of us to solve. Right? So for the next 10 years, my story was like the story of any other product of my generation, just trying to get some professional success, feeling good, feeling like if you're a good human being, getting professional success, that is enough. That is a meaningful life. But then you realize even in corporate and in life for sure, that that definition will fray. That definition is inadequate. Because even in corporate, you realize that there are certain ceilings that you cannot break, not because you're a victim, but because there are ideas about your culture that are supplied both by yourself unconsciously and by others very consciously that create a ceiling. And this happens, for example, in the game industry that I was a part of. It was a tremendous success story. We grew our studio to actually an 80-member team, which was producing game content and game design, which was being consumed by 3 million people every day. And that is huge. We're talking about, and that is the power of creativity, that the impact is disproportionate. If you have to create something that is consumed by 3 million people every day, typically you will need an enterprise of this scale, right? But in digital technologies, in creative industries, you have the power of amplification through just design and technology. So 80 people producing content for 3 million people, 3 million people playing the game 5 times a day, and each time about 5 or 6 minutes. So a small 80-member team was producing 100 million game minutes of entertainment every day. And I understood the power of creativity, the power of design, the power of technology through that. But I also realized that that is not enough for India to be considered as creative. Even in that industry, there was a ceiling that you could provide the gaming service, you could own a part of it, but you will not be granted the permission to actually do a game for the world because you're not considered creative enough to actually start expressing yourself. And that is not incorrect. While it hurts, I was part of the industry, it used to hurt me a great deal because I was representing the aspirations of my people and my creative team wanted to do something for the world. But I also understand because you're at that level where you also look at the business and the larger strategy, and you also know that talent, while it is great, is not always fungible. It's not always easy to create something for the rest of the world. And why is that? Why are we not at the seat where the decisions about global creative mediums are being taken? It is simply because we haven't found the touch with our own culture and creativity. And when you're trying to mimic something, you will always be a poor second. And that is true. And from their perspective, it was logical. So if I'm trying to make a game for the global audience, trying to tell them how to integrate something like Christmas as a cultural phenomenon, right? I will always be a poor second because I don't have a first-hand experience of that civilization, of that culture, of that history. And therefore, my claim to making a global game is a self-serving one. Right? Unless, of course, that my culture gets the power that I become the agent of my culture and that my culture has the power to generate interest globally. So I started looking inwards. That the true power for my team will also come when we make a game on Mahabharata, when we make a game on Ramayana, when we make a game on Garuda Purana. There is so much of civilizational lore that can be brought into interactive experience. For that, of course, you need a lot of other things to come together, capital, technology, art, design, all of those things. But it is very important to recognize that unless you go deep into your culture, you will not have the seat at the table in a creative industry. And that is true for economic might, that is true for political might, that is true for all other kinds of discussions. Right? So there is, at the higher level, a national strategic importance to get into our culture and knowledge systems. To me, this is not an ideal pursuit. And I would say this is the case that we need to make to our students. We need to link their personal aspiration with the aspiration of the nature, with the aspiration of the national soul, with the aspiration of what we need as a knowledge system. Right? So that is my first submission. My only hope at the end of this session is that you don't have a cognitive shift of whatever adjectives have been applied to me, that eminence, enlightening, and then you say that, okay, this is not it. I have a few things that I want to cover, but I want to have a dialogue because the concern, as I see, is not so much about one subject area. It's not about what cognition means or what perception means or what culture means. We can surely have a conversation on that. But I'd like it to be interactive, provocative, and conversational in the sense that you and I can tease out the best way to present this. And my humble submission is that, like I said, I'm not a scholar who's coming here with opinions to trade. I am here to have a conversation to see collectively how we take Indian knowledge systems to our students in an intellectually and morally inspiring manner. That's my pursuit. Now we also have the specific task of discussing the subject that we are here to discuss. Cognitive shift to solve global crisis. I want us to unpack this a little bit, and if you have questions, feel free to interrupt and raise. Firstly, we're talking about cognition. And by cognition, we are also situating that within the Indic episteme. Let's cognize this thing called Indian knowledge systems itself first, because it has great value as vocabulary that helps all of us connect. It is unthinkable for me, even 5 years ago, that a university will call somebody like me who's an outsider to come and talk to somebody, to a group which is far more knowledgeable than I am. I have no business to be sitting here as the expert when I have all of you. But it is a great sign, not because it is me. it is a great sign that we are collectively organizing ourselves under this idea, this rubric called Indian knowledge systems. And this interaction, this conversation is the medium. It's not so much about the grand idea. It is that it enables you and I to have a conversation, learn from each other, listen to each other, and over a period of time, that becomes part of our cognition. Because you've heard me today, there will be some elements that would, obviously stay back, and I would learn from this experience. And the next time I'm representing Indian knowledge systems, I will have the visual, spatial idea of this room, of the people, of the environment baked into my communication. That is what we mean by cognition, and we can get into some definitions of cognition. But why are we saying it's a cognitive shift? And why is it linked to global crisis? So let's talk about Indian knowledge systems and the best case that we can make for Indian knowledge systems. Firstly, the definition of Indic or Indian knowledge systems. Like I said, it's a strategic vocabulary. It is a policy vocabulary that helps us group. But what does it really mean? How do we understand Indian knowledge systems? If there are any thoughts, I'd be very, very happy to hear. And I can give you my definition of Indian knowledge systems that I've learned from some people, and then we can. So one is, we have a challenge, right? We are trying to articulate knowledge in a secular term, whereas the knowledge itself is spiritual, linked to a certain culture. Right? That challenge is there. And that is why we have to couch it in certain vocabulary. We will have to. The way to understand Indic knowledge systems, in my view, is that it is the cultural memeplex. It is the cultural composite of 5 different streams: the Vedic stream, the Buddhist stream, the Jaina stream, the tribal knowledge systems, and the folk knowledge systems. All of them are, quote unquote, I'm aware of the weaponization of the word indigenous, but all of them are indigenous to Bharat. And all of them have a shared metaphysics of dharma. So we should always, whenever we are talking about Indic knowledge systems, our mind, since we're talking about cognition, the way we make meaning to it ourselves is that these 5 things have to come to our mind. And this is what I mean by cognition, cognitive shift. That there is of course expansion, diversity, but there is also a boundary condition to this. There is an inside and outside to this. The dharma metaphysics is that boundary. Anybody who agrees with dharma metaphysics is part of this, right? But it is also a system. It is not just Indic, which has shared history or culture, but it is a system. What is the system part of it? How do we communicate the system part of it to our children, to our students? The system is that it has 4 elements which make any knowledge a system. First, there is an ontological proposition, which means that there is a truth claim, that there is a certain truth that this knowledge propounds. It anchors on the truth. Any formal system has certain axioms. We also have certain axioms, but there is a difference in the way Indian knowledge system considers axioms versus the formal systems of the West. We can discuss that later. But there is the idea of a truth, right? There is the epistemology to recognize the truth, right? There is actually a way. And the brilliance of this civilization is that it is darshana. It is not a philosophy. We all know this, right? And what does it mean? It means that it has the ability to be validated by different people at different points in time and arrive at the similar kind of conclusion. There might be subtle differences in the approach. There might be differences in the ultimate theorization of that. But by and large, there is a substantial portion of our knowledge system or of our knowledge, of our shared inheritance, that is validated by different people following different methods, and they all agree to it. Well, we know about the Pramana system. I don't need to speak to experts about it, but fundamentally there is an epistemology. But there are 2 more things which are important, which are distinct to the Indian knowledge system. You have the ontology and epistemology as part of any system, but you also have a matter of axiology. Axiology is, like we know, the theory of values. So it's not just knowledge in terms of scientific inquiry, validation, empiricist, but there is a value system that guides it. Should we be killing mice? Should we be, for example, we've lived through the COVID times. I don't know how many of you follow the entire debate that's happening in the West. How language was weaponized to normalize bio-warfare. This idea of gain of function. So COVID, for those of you who followed, has come out of a research that was granted under the name gain of function. And this is the power of language when it is weaponized. What is the gain? And what function is the gain being applied to? Gain of function is basically a euphemism for biological war. What are you trying to do with that research? What is the value of that research? It is scientific research. But the value of that research is that it will make you more powerful to wage wars. And what kind of wars? Biological wars. Where is the ethics in that science? Where are the values? We haven't questioned that. Why is Indian knowledge systems important? Why should we be talking uninhibitedly, unapologetically from the top of our voice about Indian knowledge systems? Because there is a crisis of ethics in education, in science, in politics today, and that cannot come unless you have the metaphysics of dharma. You cannot reason your way into some kind of morality. You can't. You need to have a different metaphysics, a philosophy of morality itself. The same people who sponsored, executed the gain of function research, almost indisputably now, also engineered its accidental release. Which means that COVID, as per the latest information and research and investigation that's happening, 3 years late. Some people have pointed it out, I've taken a public position on this 3 years ago. It is now being discussed in the European Parliament, it is being discussed in the US Congress, that this was not accidental. This was released on purpose. Where is the ethics of that science? Right? Where is the morality of that politics? And the same people also had the control over global public policy. You and I sat in our homes for 2 years by the decision, because of the decisions made by the same people who sponsored this unethical research and who engineered this accidental release. How many people lost lives? How many people lost their livelihoods? What is the value system of this thing that we call research today? Why isn't a voice from the Indian community saying this is not science as per our knowledge system? This is not research in our way of thinking. Our way of thinking cannot be ahita. It cannot be against environment. It cannot be against nature. Right? So axiology is the third one. But most critically, and this is absent in any other knowledge system, we should stake a claim to being the exceptional culture here, is that you have praxis. All cultures, all civilizations, all knowledge systems have a truth claim. They have a way of arriving at the truth. Science has one, different streams have their own this one. Maybe unless if you are a part of a social science which is only weaponized mostly, but you have your way of arriving at the truth. You also have certain values. Diversity is given as a value, equality is given as a value. You have certain claims to value. Whether you have it or not is a different story. But you do not have a functional way to embody that knowledge the way the Indian knowledge system does. If Vedanta says, I am Brahman, there is a praxis of yoga for you to realize that. You don't need to only believe. Of course, the belief in adrishta or an acceptance or a comfort with shraddha is the fundamental step. It is good if you have that sattva. But even if you are a skeptic, even if you don't have, if you follow Ashtanga yoga, you will have the opportunity to realize it for yourself. This praxis is not there. So for example, when they say we are all born with inalienable rights, which is the construct of modern political philosophy, that reason and freedom are inalienable to humans, right? And I will talk about it maybe in the next session as well. What are the limitations of reason? And what is the definition of freedom? The fundamental difference between civilizations and cultures, if you think about freedom, Rajiv Malhotra ji said all those years ago, and something that stayed with me, that's something that changed my consciousness, that's something that helped me have a cognitive shift, is that the same word freedom means two completely opposite things in two different civilizations. In the Western civilization, the idea of freedom is freedom to. Freedom to consume, freedom to express, freedom to chase, freedom to explore. The entire conception of freedom, the articulation of freedom, is a demand for expansion of human pursuit. Whereas freedom in our civilization, in our culture, is freedom from. Freedom from compulsion. Freedom from something that holds us back. Freedom from duality. It's freedom, but we are talking about a different level, different kind of freedom. Right? Again, something that we need to absolutely help our students recognize, because they are taken in by the idea of freedom. The challenge and also the technique is not so much to violently oppose that idea. All we need to do is open their eyes to the limitations of that idea, open their moral thinking to the trajectory of that idea. If we take the definition of freedom as consumption, as anything can be done by anybody, anytime, anywhere, that is the definition of freedom. That's what, if you go out, that is the culture that we're talking about, right? Now, if you are able to open their minds to the limitations of that, can 10 billion people realistically have freedom to consume everything that they want everywhere in the world? You're having avocados in your supermarket today. Just because the supply chains have been optimized, the capital has been put so much into certain technologies and certain ideas that importing an avocado halfway across the world is today cheaper for you than getting food from 100 kilometers. Now, then you talk about sustainability. How is it going to be sustainable if the food has to be transported 8,000 miles? What is the carbon footprint of that avocado? Why do we need to have our capital structures in a manner that we are able to prioritize our consumption, our lifestyle within the radius where it is sustainable? Entire sustainability discourse, if you take in the world, is all about a prayer and a hope that some new technology will solve this. It won't. That is the bad news for all this one. There is something called a paradox. Every new technology that first conserves energy eventually and inevitably consumes more energy as it scales. Think about light bulbs. Think about LEDs. If you do a computation of what LED has done to energy consumption, if you stretch it out for a certain time, you will realize that because it is subsidized, it is capitalized, it is incentivized by policy, the consumption increases to a scale where the marginal benefit of that is diminished, for those of you who are coming from economics, right? So this is a paradox. This is not going to be solved by technology. The sustainability problem is not going to be solved by technology. The sustainability problem is going to be solved by a different definition of freedom, by a different architecture of your society based on that idea of freedom. Why will a student not be inspired about this? Because they want to address sustainability. It is just that we haven't found the right perch to talk about sustainability to them. Sustainability and ecology, which is dharma, that which sustains, all of us know is dharma. But what is it that sustains? What is the architecture of sustenance? My simple, unscholarly definition of dharma is that we create surplus in everything that we do. We create a surplus in the relationships that we have, which means that we give more than what we take. We create a surplus with ourself, whether it is in the consumption that we have, whether it is in the thoughts that we feed ourselves, ahara, which are all the Ayurvedic ideas that come to us, right? Or in our relationship with nature and others. We are able to give more than what we take. That is the surplus, and that surplus is dharma. And that is why we say Sanatana Dharma has created the surplus on which modernity runs today. This is not an exceptionalist statement. This is the truth. Even today, India with 1.6, we are told, billion people today, is still the only civilization that lives within the means of one planet Earth. Which means, and this is a research coming to us from 3 years for those of you who are in sustainability scholars, there was a research on which country's lifestyle, if it is scaled to the entire planet, is sustainable for the entire planet. If you scale the lifestyle of US, I think you need about 8 planet Earths. If you scale the lifestyle of Australia, I think it's about 12. If you do that to China, it's about 4. It's only India that, if you scale to the rest of the world, it is within the planet Earth, one planet Earth, 0.8. And why is that? Again, because we have a different definition of meaning of life itself, which comes to us as the idea of Purushartha. So the idea of good life as pursuit of life, liberty, happiness tied to freedom by employing reason is the cognition today. If you shift that to the idea of Purushartha, which has Dharma as the first, which is the creation of surplus, which is responsibility for your actions to yourself, to nature, to others, is the only way sustainability can be achieved. We have the best case to make for Indic knowledge systems. So just quick recap, Indic knowledge systems is the cultural composite that comes to us from 5 different streams. It is a system because it has a truth claim. It has a way to understand, experience, validate the truth. It is falsifiable. It is also repeatable. It is generalizable. It has a certain axiology, the values, which addresses the ethics crisis that we have today. Just yesterday, Stanford head had to resign because he was part of a research on neurosciences, which had all false claims, which went under his pen and it was approved. Why did it happen? It's not that person. Because 85% of academic research in the West today is sponsored by the industry. So if I am a pharma industry that is sponsoring research coming out with a drug on neurosciences, why would I want you to publish something that is going to affect the sales of my drugs? So the crisis is structural, which means you need a new supply of ethics to research. And lastly, it has a praxis to realize. And that praxis makes all the difference from individual sustenance to planetary sustenance. You cannot solve the global sustainability challenge. I don't know how many of you study these things professionally, but 2015 was when this entire framework of sustainability development goals and all of that vocabulary that we use, the words that we feel good about in the world today, all of that has been introduced. About 160, 180 countries came together and said, yes, we all want sustainable development goals. Right? 5 years after that, when they did a survey in 2020 on what has been the progress, after 180 countries came together, allocated capital, allocated leadership attention, allocated all of their mind space and talent and energy, we have not made 1 inch of progress. Rather, we've regressed. And all those parameters, the regression in the last 5 years from 2015 to 2020 was accelerated. In many cases, in many of the sub-parameters, we are actually going back. Whatever progress that we were making before 2015, we went into the opposite direction even faster. Why does this happen? Why does it happen that all the global leaders, countries, nations come together on something and yet we are not able to make progress? If you are able to explore that question, it is very clear that you have the wrong knowledge or you don't have the right knowledge. You cannot address sustainability by introducing new technology. You have to have a list of stop doing. What is the list of stop doing? Now, if you have to have the list of stop doing, then your cognition of freedom is impacted. Do you see this? Do you see the link? If I have taken freedom and human agency as the axiom, and there is a challenge, global crisis of sustainability, if my cognition of freedom is still that human ingenuity, human creativity will solve by creating new technology this problem, so therefore I use my freedom to create new technology, just because you have given that definition to yourself as a human, planet has no obligation to agree. We are not saving planet. We are trying to save ourselves. All we need is planet to just flip an inch and we will be forever gone. So therefore, it has to be a different cognition. So why are we saying it's a cognitive shift? Because there are certain mental constructs that drive worldviews. Those wild worldviews drive our behaviors. Those behaviors generate a culture. So there is a loop between culture and the worldview that is reinforcing each other. I believe I'm a free individual. I can employ my freedom and agency. I do something. Culture values that. And because the culture values for the new people who are coming into that, the lesson is that you need to employ your reason and freedom. But what's happening as a combination of this to nature? What is happening as a combination of that to your mental health? What is happening to this as a combination to relationship between nations? That is not fitting into this. And therefore, we don't have any means to solve problems of a grander scale. Because at an abstract, all problems of grand scale are problems of collaboration. And that is why you need to study this civilization. It's a living civilization of whatever number you take, 5,000, 7,000, take your fancy. But it is collective human experience for several millennia of living together. We are not able to live in families together today. Don't we need to study a civilization that has lived together? Does it not have lessons to offer to the rest of the world? Are we simply going to be consumers of this utterly adolescent diatribe called diversity, equity, inclusion? It is nonsense. It is a weapon that's happening in corporate today. There are entire training programs that the West is teaching us about diversity. What a phenomenal joke. You are the monotheist culture. You are the monoculture because you have only one idea of freedom and one idea of reason. We've been dealing with diversity for millennia. That is why we have so many religions, that is why we have so many languages, that is why we have the biosphere, that is why we have so much cultural diversity. Why would an Indian company take lessons on diversity from a US certified agency? I was, and this is what I mean when you're in corporate, sometimes you realize the ceilings of this as well. So when you're there and you have your executives coming down, let's say from US or headquarters, wherever, it's polite of them. See, they're not Swan, but it's informed by this one. One is they also have a question of whether you can understand English or you speak. They try to be a little polite, which is actually a bit, of a superiority complex. Will you be able to understand this? They show concern in meetings. Will you be able to understand this or whatever? So I had to stand up and tell them that there are people in this room, 6 of us, who speak 5 different languages. We come from 5 different cultures. So our cognition, our neural complexity, our neural capacity to adapt, our, what they're calling it neuroplasticity now, for those who are in this one, is far more on a daily basis. Because for us, it's not a theory. I am here in Kerala, I don't speak Malayalam, I need to find certain words. So constantly my neurons are active. My creative work is active to find gestures, to find some words, to communicate with you. An Indian kid grows up in such a complex web of relationships. He knows that there is a culture that has to be automatically protected, but because he or she is born into it. He knows that my parents are different when grandparents are around. When grandparents are not there, they are different. He knows that when the uncle comes, then my mom is different. But when my mom's brother comes, she is different. My father is different when his sister comes, when the sister comes home. But if the brother comes, they go to the terrace and do something that is fun. So this is not questioned by the kid, it is absorbed. The Indian kid automatically has comfort with ambiguity. He is not imposing certitude. This is our strength. In a world that is growing so complex, the ability to manage diversity, the ability to manage volatility, the ability to manage uncertainty is the superpower. And that we have in what we call our culture. That is the case for Indian knowledge systems. It's just that we haven't expressed this way. We haven't told our children that the same problems that you care about, that you really think good, that makes you feel good. And we have to understand this psychology. It's true for all of us, but particularly for young people starting out in their lives. They follow the liberal ideology, and I'm going to speak freely. If some of you do not agree with it, I'm absolutely happy to be challenged. Liberalism is a religion. Right? It just goes with the idea of something else, but it has all the characteristics of a religion. It's a very efficient religion. It's as efficient as any of the Abrahamic faiths. In fact, it is one of the bigger dangers that we have, because at least the other ones we've identified as different. The challenge that we have in liberal ideology is that there are at least 5 or 6 units which are working in consonance, because the cognition of each of that unit is mapped, the incentives are mapped, the structures are aligned. And I'll try and unpack this a little bit, and then I'll take a break for questions or thoughts or whatever. Now, the question is, why does an individual do what she or he does? Especially, I'm sure all of us, you know, you are all teachers, so you constantly wondering, why is this young person doing this way, right? You know, why does somebody ride fast? Why does somebody do? So that is act of nature, prakriti. You know, we have our own theories that explain all of the complexity. But we today see, why is this person going and lighting a candle for something that's happening in America? Why is the Indian cricket team taking a knee for Black Lives Matter? Why? Who told them that it is? Are there no issues that we have of our own that you would better represent? Is this really a concern for you? Do you even know the history of that? Why is this happening? Why are the individuals taking those actions? At the top level, we need to think about the Western nation state. For the Western nation state, after the end of settler colonization is where you go and occupy other lands physically, right? Now you don't have that anymore because there has been a movement, there has been a consciousness. So what are the tools of colonization then? There are many things, much literature is already there on this. But the architecture of the global corporation is definitely one of them. The architecture of the multilateral organizations. What is the end result of World War II? End result of World War II is that there is an international institutional architecture that favors US. For 40 years after that, they had a challenge with Russia as the prime challenger. That was not there for a brief period of 20 years. Now China might become this one. So it's always at the geostrategic level, that is a power play, and they create institutions, whether you call International Monetary Fund, for example, the entire World Health Organization. What did World Health Organization do about the COVID accident, about the COVID research? It actually sided with the very people who created the crisis. It's supposed to be a multilateral organization representing world interest. Where is that? Right? So you have these structures that they have created, but the structures now have to be sold to the world using a humanist language, because you cannot do direct force. So for them, the idea of freedom, the idea of reason, the idea of democracy, all of these things are not mere purchase that human civilization has reached after much experimentation with barbarism. For them, it is a strategic tool. Democracy is also a killer app for them, because they use the idea, because the compact has come. That's what Fukuyama means when he says end of history, that we've reached the pinnacle of human organization. This combination of free markets, democracy, and liberal ideology of individual enterprise and individual freedom is the end of history, is the perfect combination that can now be exported and supplied to the world. The minute they do that, they get to shape how you think. Politically, they get to shape, because your political discourse is also in the same idea of human rights. It's not in the idea of Sarvabhuta. It is not in the idea of Panchabhuta. It is not in the idea of all the Antariksha, like the Sukta tells us. So we say in our Sukta, we say Antariksha Sukha. We also say benediction to the peace of the entire universe. That does not have, only humans have rights. So whatever argument you have, whether it is CPM, BJP, Congress, has to be within that ambit of human rights as described by the liberal ideology. You see this? You can have all debate and discourse in the spirit of free speech and democracy, but under the rubric of what we've set as the goal. We are not able to challenge why only human rights. What about human duties towards the planet? Pancharana. The Hindu cosmology says you are born into debt. Debt to your ancestors, debt to nature, debt to your parents. Imagine the life and the mind and the cognition of somebody who is seeped in Pancharana. Automatically the posture will be this. That is why this culture has this posture. Because you are not walking into the world as a free agent full of rights. You are walking into the world, the story in your mind, the cognition is that I have a responsibility towards everyone. It is a wise culture. It's not a juvenile culture. Right? So we have that as the Western nation state. At the next level, you have academia, the Western academia. Right? The job of academia is to create new ideas that can then be used by politics. Unfortunately, that's what it's been reduced. They have certain ideas and certain theories. What you call social sciences today, what you call humanities today, is basically all of the Enlightenment philosophy that has come to us from there. We don't have our own social sciences. Raji Malhotra ji has spoken about this, multiple thinkers have spoken about this. Then you have technologies, which is very, very important. What is their incentive? So we are talking about structure and incentive. For the Western nation state, the incentive is that liberalism can be used to control the world. It is the policy. It can be converted into hard currency as policy. It is the soft idea of rights, soft idea of freedom, which can then be converted into hard currency of policy. Your entire justice system will be dependent on what I say is human right. Right? Similarly, next we are talking about academia. What I think is philosophy is good for life is what you will teach to your kids. Third is technology's products. They talk about all the free speech, technology, radical equality, creativity, democratized, all of that. Their incentive for a creative person, especially within the technology world where you see the kick of what I am producing being consumed by billions every day, it is the sheer creative kick. And there, I know that if it is a liberal ideology, then my technology will spread. Facebook like will happen only when you and I also start thinking about ourselves as people who need to be liked, people who want to be compared. It's a psychological thing. All of us have that. If your culture tells you that, why are you going after this like? If the elders, for example, that's what we do in our culture, we would have seen, at least all of us, our generation would have grown. If you're doing something like that to be, if it's a little out of order to be liked, your father generally will slap you, right? And say, you're not so great, right? And don't be burdened by this need to be liked. You be good. That's the general idea of the culture. But that will not spread technology. If you're already happy, then how will your post go viral? So they will have to side by the philosophy of liberalism to advance their products. You see this? Right? Next is media. Media is anyways an arm of state policy, so the Western nation states have a certain strategy and they're part of that, so they will have to advance. The role of individual creators or artists is critical. What is the incentive for artists to side with liberal ideology, to have that cognition of freedom? Because unfortunately, the Western philosophy, in its trajectory of freedom as supreme, means that everything before us has to be broken for us to express ourselves. The Western civilization story is a story of continuous disruption. Our story is a story of continuity. You go to the greatest of temples, there is no name of an artist there. You go to any museum in the West, the artist is the front and center. The artist is the story. In our civilization, no artist is telling, once again, he is saying that I am creating an original story. Every single Shastra, every single sculpture says, my Guru's Guru, my Guru's Guru, my Guru's Guru, and fundamental goes either to Brahma or to Vishnu or to Mahashiva. We draw it from there, we are doing what has already been done. My creativity is in my ability to retell the same story, not in saying that I am creating something new. Right? But for the Western artist today, signature, label, everything is under the name of individual. Right? That means that art, one of the most powerful mediums of cognition, meaning making, aspiration setting, has been hijacked by the liberal ideology. Right? So you and I, when you say we are having a challenge, sir said, professor said about we're having a tough time talking to our children about Indian knowledge systems. We need to understand the reasons why that is happening. You are not working against something within Amrita or within Kerala. You are working against a globally coordinated network of actors who all share very, very powerful incentives. So our work has to be at that level. Our work has to be about decoupling art from this idea of individuality, decoupling creativity and technology from this idea of freedom and individuality alone, decoupling national policy making as the idea of human-centered, anthropocentric policy. That is why this cognitive shift is important. Because that cognition of humans as the center of creation story, we are obviously in many ways God's special this one, because we have the means. But the way our culture looks at it is everything in nature is divine. We have the means to realize it. Something else will realize it in the next janma. There is no this one. That makes all the difference. You are talking to your students who are now essentially products of one life metaphysics. The central cognition of our times, the central problem of our times is that we've forgotten karma and punarjanma. If I do not have multiple life metaphysics, it is only natural that I want to accumulate. What other reason can you give to me about life? All of us want to be happy. That is the fundamental thing that drives every single creature, every single second, nanosecond in this universe. The question is, what is happiness? If happiness is maximizing my one lifetime, then consumption and going for variety is a logical outcome. Let's understand this. It's not illogical. That is why I don't want to be constricted in one marriage. Biggest challenge, social challenge today, young people do not want to commit. Why? Why is that happening? It's happening because you have given yourself a different definition of happiness. It is easy to come out of certain commitments today. In our general culture, if there is something wrong, you are asked to endure it as much as possible because it is part of your karma. You have to endure, you have to overcome, you have to find resources within you. But if it is completely given as a choice, I'm not saying that is entirely right or this is entirely wrong. There has to be a combination. But because the story is so lopsided today, we have to question it. If your entire decision making is on the idea of choice and agency, because I am the actor and I am the center, then any kind of discomfort will automatically give you the easy way out. You're talking to that generation. It's not their fault. We've created this. First thing is we have to take responsibility. People like me have to take responsibility because I was part of the industry that generated this discourse. I know the power of technology, design, sophistication when it gets into the hands of people playing games. We create and design engagement at that level. That is there. And we tell them that is freedom, that is achievement, that is all of the things that are nice about life. So you are talking to all of this. So when an individual today takes a knee for Black Lives Matter or holds a candle march for something that's happening 8,000 miles while being completely oblivious to what's happening in the next door. Look at this one. We don't know what's happening in our neighbor's house if they have a problem. We don't know what's happening in our community, in our society. We don't care many of the times. But we will talk very animatedly about what's happening in US or what's happening in other parts of the world. Why? Because that has been set up as the goal. That has been set up as the aspiration by a combination of nation state, academia, media, technologists and artists. So the individual cognition, the individual decision making is hijacked. Today the colonization is of the senses. It is not of the land. Vamsi Julurji writes about this. So the battle has moved into the mind. And what civilization and what culture has the best theory of mind? All of what we call spirituality is the mind. That is why this is a issue not of individual or a single set or a single university. This is a national sovereignty issue. Indian knowledge systems is an urgency for national sovereignty, because if our minds are hijacked, you might have the land, but you're living somebody else's life. You see this? This is the story. That is why we put this in abstract terms called generation gap. It's not a generation gap, it is a cultural loss. We are just explaining why are so many parents not able to talk to their children anymore. Teachers who are not able to. These are great institutions. Because of a spiritual strength, there is still something as a culture that holds respect, tradition, decency, dignity. Walk into the universities of social sciences, and this one, some of you might have experienced that. There is nothing called decency. It is obnoxious public behavior, which is then sold as freedom. It is the universities which are destroying children, unfortunately. Not because they want to, nobody wants to, but because they've taken the wrong idea of freedom. They've taken the wrong ideology. So this is not an esoteric, abstract, self-indulgent subject. First thing that we need to be convinced about is that if you do not do this, if you do not engage with Indic knowledge systems, the challenge or the loss is personal. It will come back into your family. Because when culture is impacted, your family cannot be separate. This is a lesson that we need to take to industry. This is a lesson that we need to take to parents. This is a lesson that we need to take to academia. This is a lesson that we need to take to the media. This is a lesson that we need to take to the product creators. This is a lesson that we need to take to all the people who care about a decent society. Right? I'll pause here, and then we can explore some of these things. But so far, I've tried to address the Indian knowledge systems and cognition, cognitive shift, and why this is urgent, and what is the moral and intellectual case for Indian knowledge systems. Thank you.